Jack Carter had owned and maintained the private airstrip for years, long before the surrounding neighborhood even existed. One morning, he arrived to find a brand new guardhouse sitting beside the entrance to his runway. A security guard was checking vehicles, as if Jack himself needed permission to enter. Jack asked the guard who had authorized the new checkpoint. Before Marcus could answer, Victoria Hayes stepped out of the nearby clubhouse with a folder in her hand. She pointed directly at Jack and told him that the HOA had updated the airport access rules. Jack looked at Victoria and asked what authority the HOA had over his runway. Victoria replied that the neighborhood association had jurisdiction over community safety and aircraft traffic. Jack almost laughed when she claimed that even private pilots now needed HOA approval. Victoria opened her folder and produced a printed HOA notice titled Airfield Access and Safety Protocol. She told Jack that every pilot using the runway would have to check in at her guardhouse. Jack took the paper, read it carefully, and noticed something very important was missing. Jack asked Victoria to show him the deed or airport agreement that gave the HOA control of his runway. Victoria avoided the question and instead said the neighborhood had voted unanimously to install the checkpoint. Jack calmly replied that an HOA vote could not automatically transfer ownership of private property. Victoria told Marcus to stop Jack from entering the runway until he showed an HOA authorization card. Marcus hesitated because he recognized Jack as the owner and had seen him operating the aircraft many times. Jack simply stood there and waited for Marcus to decide what he was actually being asked to enforce. Jack walked to the side of the runway and pointed toward a weathered metal sign near the hangar. The sign clearly identified the airfield as privately owned and listed Jack's aviation company. Victoria looked at it, then insisted that the HOA had shared authority because residents could see the runway from their homes. Jack asked Victoria one simple question. If the HOA owns this runway, where is the recorded agreement? Victoria immediately said the documents were with the board. Jack smiled slightly and told her that was exactly why he was calling his aviation attorney. Victoria suddenly changed her tone and claimed the HOA was only trying to protect nearby residents from aircraft noise. Jack reminded her that the runway had operated for years under established aviation procedures. Then he asked whether the HOA had actually contacted the airport authority before installing the guardhouse. Victoria paused for the first time when Jack asked whether any aviation authority had approved the new checkpoint. Marcus looked toward her, realizing he had never been shown such approval either. Jack then made the call that would change the entire fight over the runway. Jack stepped away from the group and called his aviation attorney. He explained that the HOA had installed a guardhouse across the entrance to his privately owned airstrip. His attorney immediately asked him one question. Did they get your written permission? Jack answered that he had never signed anything giving the HOA control over his runway. His attorney told him to photograph the new guardhouse, every posted notice, and the runway entrance. Jack immediately began documenting everything from several angles. Victoria told Jack that taking photographs was unnecessary because the HOA had already made its decision. Jack replied that decisions were one thing, but legal authority was another. Marcus quietly looked at the guardhouse documents, realizing nobody had shown him an ownership agreement. Jack's attorney asked him to check the county property records before making any further move. Jack opened the public records on his phone and found the original airfield parcel information. The runway parcel was listed separately from the HOA-controlled residential property. Jack showed the property information to Marcus and asked him to compare it with the guardhouse paperwork. Marcus studied both documents carefully. After a few seconds, he admitted that the HOA documents did not appear to transfer ownership of the runway. Victoria became angry and told Marcus that he was not qualified to interpret property documents. Marcus calmly replied that he was only trying to understand what authority he was supposed to enforce. Jack remained silent, letting the documents speak for themselves. Jack's attorney called him back and asked whether the HOA had physically blocked the runway. Jack looked behind him at the newly installed barrier and guardhouse. He answered yes, and his attorney told him that detail could become very important. A second aircraft owner arrived and stopped at the entrance when Marcus asked for the new HOA authorization. The pilot looked confused and said he had used the runway for years without needing neighborhood permission. Victoria immediately stepped forward and told him the rules had changed. The visiting pilot asked Victoria to show him the aviation regulation, or airport agreement, supporting the new restriction. Victoria had no document to present. Jack realized the HOA's new rule was already affecting pilots who had nothing to do with the neighborhood dispute. Jack's attorney finally arrived at the airfield with a copy of the original property records. He walked directly to the guardhouse and asked Victoria to identify the document that gave the HOA control of the runway. Victoria opened her folder, but this time, even she knew the answer was not inside.